too and feature film director with EWTN. Faith and Life tells the stories of Catholics living their life through their faith. These inspiring people tell us where they have come from and where God is taking them. In this episode of Faith and Life, I will be chatting to Marion Carroll. Marion suffered MS for 17 years, leaving her bedridden and doubly incontinent. But on the 3rd of September 1989, Marion was healed, right here in Knock, Ireland's national shrine. Marion, we're here in the Basilica at Knock Shrine, and back on the 3rd of September 1989, this is where your life changed. Tell us about that day.
It changed completely, but little did I know coming down that it would change so much. And when they brought the stretcher into Basilica, and actually were in the spot where Our Lady was, and they put my stretcher right in front of Our Lady. When I looked up at that statue, it was the most beautiful, most friendliest statue I've ever seen in my life. Mm-hmm. And I made a statement to Our Lady that it wasn't, I was thinking about dying, and I said to her, well, you're a mother too, you know how I feel. The ceremony started, my Bishop Colin O'Reilly anointed me for the sick. When my bishop came down to Blessed Eucharist and the monstrance for the blessing of the sick, and he came in front of the stretcher and he held it up and he blessed me, it was at that time that I got this beautiful feeling, a magnificent feeling, and like a whispery breeze telling me that if the stretcher was open, that I could get up and walk. I've been very down-to-earth and practical. I thought I'd have more sense in getting ideas like this, and I go home and tell Jimmy, he'd definitely think I'm nuts. And I wasn't going to tell anybody. And
of course then you did tell people.
I did.
You know, was it open the straps in the stretcher?
It was the nurse. First of all, the doctor was with us. She came over to me, his wife came over talking to me. He wasn't my doctor, but I knew them. And she was talking to me and just said, would you think I was stupid if the stretcher was open, I could get up and walk? She didn't know what to do, I knew by her face. So she called the nurse, Marion Rafferty, and she opened the stretcher, but she came the next day and she told me she only opened to pacify me. But when she opened the stretcher, my two legs swung out and I stood up straight. I wasn't even a bit stiff after all them years. You know, it was like nothing was wrong. And I stood up and walked around and
what was going through your head? I mean, after so many years in a stretcher, you were bedridden at that point, doubly incontinent, and all of a sudden...
It was a bit of a daze. It was like it was happening to someone else.
Right.
You know, yet it was happening to me, you know. And then not only when I stood up, but when I stood up, right in front of me, I seen my own heart. And it was so full of joy and peace and a love there is no end to. It was so shiny, it was like looking directly into the sun, but the rays of that came towards me, and I got all them gifts of that joy and that peace and that great love.
I was in Knock the day Marion was healed. Marion doesn't realise how near I was as a nurse that day, because I was working with our own Arda Clonmacnoise pilgrimage, and we always wore full uniform. I was walking up in the big dining room, going this way, but I happened to look to my left, and I said to myself, good God, what's going on over there? And Marion was lying prone on a stretcher, and she just manoeuvred herself up and got the covers on the stretcher and she started saying, "Get Sister Antonia, get Sister Antonia." So all I did was run to Sister Antonia and say, "Go quick to Marion Carroll, there's something wrong with her." I hadn't a clue. It never occurred to me to think that God, Marion has power. I was so overcome and so shocked. And then I would have had to go and deal with, shall we call them, our own patients. And then after a while, there was such activity, it was awful. And the words were going round, "Marion Carroll is moving, Marion Carroll is moving." And everybody was excited, happy and tearful with joy that Marion Carroll was moving. And the day then progressed because I didn't see Marion after that, because I think it was Dr. O'Mara took over, and then the people that would have been closest to her on the pilgrimage, but it was surreal.
What can you remember of that day 30 years ago when you presented Marion with the Eucharist?
Well, I can remember something that has nothing to do with Marion in a way, but I remember coming to Knock on that day with a great burden that I was carrying, a pastoral burden which had come my way and was just troubling me greatly. So I arrived here in a rather, what shall I say, dampened in spirit somewhat. But something about that day touched me too, I think, because when I heard what happened, it gave me a context in which to see my own pain, and that has been a blessing for me since.
I sat up straight the whole way home in the ambulance. And coming down near our drive in Athlone Town, I said to Anne Flanagan, the nurse with the order of Malta, I said, "Anne, put on the collar, we'll say nothing to Jimmy, we'll surprise him." But I forgot I was sitting, because even in the wheelchair, I had to be strapped in, I had no balance. And Anne put on the collar, and Jerry back into the drive. Jerry got out to open the back of the ambulance, and Jimmy came out the front door, and I heard him saying to Jerry, "I suppose I better get the wheelchair." Yeah. And Jerry said, "Well, I suppose you better," in a voice that wasn't too sure what was happening. I was walking down the steps of the ambulance. Anne was one side, and Jerry was the other. And Jimmy came out the front door with the wheelchair, and he said, "Well, Mar, how was Knock?" I said, "It was all right, Jim. Why would anybody bother going down there?" He didn't realise I was walking.
That day, on the 3rd of September 1989, when Marion came home from Knock, what was that like?
That was unbelievable on that day. I didn't know the functions of Knock. I didn't know what went on in Knock. I've gone into Knock twice or three times prior to that, and I didn't know what time Marion would be home that day. And I was waiting for her. And I was in the room. We had a room set up and it was facing the drive coming in, and I was expecting the ambulance to come in any moment. And at 5 o'clock the evening or 6 o'clock, Marion and Jerry and Anne backed in the drive with the ambulance. And Jerry got out of the ambulance. He came around, he opened the back door of the ambulance, and I could see into the ambulance from standing at the door. I could see Marion sitting up in the ambulance. And I didn't know, because she couldn't sit up. She had no functions of her body. She couldn't sit up. She had to be strapped into a wheelchair. And there she was sitting in the back of the ambulance, but it didn't register with me that she was sitting. And I went in to get the wheelchair. I got back out with the wheelchair, and she was coming down the back of the ambulance with Anne one side and Jerry the other side. And it still never registered with me that she was walking. And I said I'd get the wheelchair, so I brought the wheelchair out. She sat into the wheelchair and she followed me in. It was an electric wheelchair. She followed me into the house, and I sat down and she swung around behind me and she said, "Jim," she says, "something wonderful has happened today." I said, "What?" She says, I can walk," and she stood up in front of me.
I went over and I put my arms around him. I've never seen a man crying like him. And he got down on his knees and he started thanking the Lord. You know, it wasn't until afterwards I learnt a lot. I learnt there was times after Jimmy washed, fed, changed or moved me, and he left our bedroom, he got down on his knees and he asked the Lord to take him and to cure me.
You weren't just healed, your whole family was healed because
The whole
it changed
family
them.
was healed. A lot of people got so much from it.
How did your life then change after that moment?
The first year was grand. I went dancing. I tried colouring my hair and you name it, everything a woman does. And then I got my ministries. I was invited to talk in churches. And then when I got my ministries, people started coming to me to pray with them. And
this is the sick?
The sick.
Yeah.
And I made an appointment with my bishop, Bishop Colin O'Reilly, told him all that happened. And he said to me, "You know, Marion, the Lord has blessed you." But he set up a committee. So he did, and we met them for several weeks, myself and Jimmy, when they talked about my ministry, and he gave me his full blessing. And then when a handmaid in Knock, people were coming here for me to pray, and I went to Monsignor Quinn, I told him, Monsignor Greeley, and I told him all about it. He said, "Marion, I know you always send people to the Eucharist." He said, "Your job here is to pray with people." And Monsignor Quinn told me the same. And Monsignor Quinn, one anniversary here, told people I was an ambassador of Knock. And it was always, I never forgot my anniversary. Always that day would stand up and talk about it.
And not only your ministry then, was it a few years later you wrote a book about all of this?
We wrote a book. John Scally, came down and he was actually doing an interview for radio, and he said, "There's a book in this." And I said, "Is there?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay." Now I had a diary, I wrote everything down. And I said to him, "Here, John, read this, but don't write it. If you were going to write a book, I'm not going to write a book on revenge, just God's love, what it is."
And was this to give people hope?
To give people hope, because, you know, I am nothing. I'm just an ordinary person, a wife and a mother and a grandmother now, thank God. And I was never anything special. I was always last in the queue, you know. And I am just like them. And there's nothing the Lord can't do. He's the greatest doctor in the world. And every time someone comes to go into their own church or here at the shrine and the healing of the sick, not one person here, whether they're sick or not sick, goes without a gift from Jesus. But it mightn't be what they want, but what they need at that time in their lives. I often wondered how many people came to Knock Shrine here for the day and maybe about to have a heart attack or a stroke or something, but the Lord reached out and stopped it and healed them. They might never know that. And you know, every time you pray, every time you ask, there's an answer.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
You grew up in Athlone in the 50s. What was it like back then?
There was loads of children and we had great times. When the snow came and the ice, we'd use the hills for sliding down. And then in the summer, we used to get cardboard and use that for going down the hills. And I remember one time my mother got a new washing machine, a twin tub, and I was looking for something to use for the snow. So I took it. But it was, you know, and if you missed the rosary in one house, you were caught for it in another.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. And have you any siblings?
I have 3 brothers and a sister. And I was the eldest. There's a good 8 years between. I was the only child for 8 years. That
must have been a big shock. Being the only child for 8 years, and then all of a sudden you've 3 brothers and a sister.
No, I got used to it. It was grand to have others around.
Yes.
In a sense. Now there were terrors at times, but then the boys kind of stuck together. My sister is 18 years younger than me.
And what did your mummy and daddy do?
My father was a shoe repairer and he had a little shoe shop, and both of them worked in it.
Right.
Both of them worked.
And that was in Athlone?
That was in Athlone. At that time, we lived on the Connaught side, and the business was on the Leinster side. And then Daddy built a house over at the business, so we moved over to the Leinster side of the town.
And was the faith a big part of the family?
It was, because I remember we always prayed the rosary, and of course, like everybody else, we were always in trouble in some way or other. But yes, and you see, it was part of everyday life. The church was a very big thing. I mean, it was Sunday, you went down, and there was the choir, and I used to love the prayer books and all of that. I just, for some reason or other, you see, I had TB as a child, and then after I was cured, my father organised a building of grotto with others in Thanksgiving, but I just always liked praying. I wouldn't be overboard now, but I always liked praying. I always loved an altar. Even in my bedroom, if you came into my bedroom as a teenager, there was a picture one side of Our Lady and the Child Jesus, and there was a picture of the Sacred Heart on the other. Well, I would be great at spending money, so to go to dance on Thursday night, I'd put the money behind Our Lady and the Child Jesus to protect that, and the Sacred Heart for Sunday night, you know.
Yeah.
And always knew I could ask them for anything. The consecration of Mass, now I do tell the teenagers when I go to them in schools and that I used to go to Mass and think the priest would never shut up and get down. But when it came to the consecration, this is the time, the greatest miracle in the world. I could ask Jesus for anything. Whether it was a fella I liked and he wasn't looking at me, or was it grounded, or I wanted a new dress for a dance. And that was my time to ask him for anything. And my father loved St. Anthony. And he was a great friend, because Daddy took care of the Franciscans, and he used to do their shoes and all, helped them out whenever he could, and he was very good to them. And but I remember one time I was going to a very special dance, and I wanted a new dress, and I hadn't a hope. So I went into the friary and said a prayer, and I still see my dad, Lord rest him, in the shop, and he had a pair of men's shoes, and he was looking at the sole he put on. He said, "Where were you?" "I was up in the friary, Dad." "What were you doing up there?" "I was talking to St. Anthony." "About what?" he said. "Well," I said, "there's a dress of Marguerite's and I'd love it for the dance." He said, "And what does St. Anthony say?" He said, "You take care of me, Dad, and he'll take care of you." So it worked both ways.
Did you ever get that dress?
Oh, I did. I got the dress, you know. But, and that's what life was. I would dance 7 nights a week. I loved dancing. And, of course, then eventually I discovered Elvis Presley. I'll never forget it. I was up with cousins on a holiday, and Devil in Disguise, and there was a jukebox. And that was my love affair for life with Elvis. And but then when I met my own Elvis, I still love his music, I have all his music and that, but he didn't become as important as
your husband,
as my husband Jimmy. Jimmy was the one.
And going back then, when did the faith become your own?
I think as a child. You see, my mother and father, as I told you, worked in the shop. And I could tell Jesus and Mary anything. They were the ones I could talk to. They were the ones that I could tell my troubles to, or pain, or something that was bothering me. They were the only ones I had, really, because Mammy and Daddy didn't come back until I was gone to school before they left. And then when I was nearly in bed, you could say, by the time they came back.
And that's what life was like back then. People had to work.
That's right. So I had 2 people that I could trust, and that was Jesus and Mary, and they became the centre of my life.
Come back to that time with the TB. That must have been a very scary period for your family.
It must have been. It must have been for my mother and father, because I didn't realise I was sick, and I suppose people didn't come. They were afraid of it at the time. But there was a lovely family that came to live beside my grandparents, and Pop Nevin, he used to be a chimney sweep, and they brought me to Knock for the first time. I went down the train one Sunday. Everybody was afraid, but they brought me. And I remember we made the tea down at the graveyard for the picnic. And I don't remember the church. Definitely remember the shops and the cobble streets. And I remember I had about 5 shillings, which was a lot then. And I bought presents for my mother. But I only had I think it was 1 and 6 or something left, and I seen a prayer, motorist prayer from my father. St. Christopher, to you we pray, to guard and guide us on our way. And I wanted to buy it, but I didn't have enough money. I remember Mrs. Nevin saying to the man in the stall, that little girl's after giving you all her money now, can you not give it to her? So I brought home to my father, you know, and they were all great memories. And that was the first time I went to Knock.
Lovely.
So it was.
And you've got some photographs here, and you've talked there about dancing.
Oh, yes.
And I can see here you're wearing an traditional Irish dancing outfit.
That's right.
What age were you back then?
I must have been, I was only a little one. I could have been 7, 8. And I remember in the Dean Crow Hall on the Connaught side, there was a fesh on one night and I was dancing. And the next minute my father walked in and I just stopped. I stood on the stage like that, looking at my father, didn't dance anymore. You know, I often think of that, but I enjoyed that. You know, I always loved dancing.
Also then, there's this photograph here. Where are you in this photograph?
I am the little baby. That's my first birthday. And there's my Aunt Maura's dear Lord rest her, and my Uncle Sean and Christy and Simon. They're all dead now, Lord rest them. But there was the Egan's there and the Glavies and the Berrigans and, you know, and that was my first. And
then, as you talk about later in your life, you met your Elvis.
Yes.
Yes, Jimmy, your husband. And here's a great photograph, and that's of the two of you on your wedding day. And when was that?
That was on the 5th of June 1972. And it was a very big wedding. Mummy and Daddy had a lot of friends. Jimmy had decided to join the army 3 months before that.
Right. And
when we got married, we had 2 days, because Jimmy hadn't passed out as a recruit.
Right.
But he was on the all-army shooting team. And Jimmy won the all-army marksman's badge, which was, you know, hadn't come a lot at that time then, but he won the highest award for shooting. And I remember he got that and he got £18, which was great, you know. I mean, the army wage was only about 8.
Wow.
You know.
How did you actually meet Jimmy?
I met Jimmy in the local dance hall. I fell over someone's foot and bumped into him. And that was it for 50 years this year.
My goodness, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And so Jimmy has been with you then throughout all of this?
Jimmy took the biggest burden of my illness. A lot of people couldn't handle it, including my own family. And Jimmy was marvellous. Jimmy washed, fed, changed me, and Cora and Anthony helped them when, you know, as much they could for their age. And he never left my side except to go to work. And even when I was in the hospital, he came in every day to feed me. He went home then and took care of the children, came back in that evening. And he's always been with me no matter what. It might seem strange, but we're 50 years married, but we're still one another's best friend as well as husband and wife.
And you mentioned there being through it all, and of course that is the illness. This must have been the time when you actually had MS.
That's right. That's when I was in bed here. If you left me lying that way in the morning, I stayed like that till you came back at night. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything for myself.
Please join me in the second programme of this Faith and Life 2-part special, when I will be chatting to Marion about her illness and how the church officially recognised the unexpected healing after 30 years of investigation.